I'm Dale Smith for Looney Politics, and this last week we saw a fairly unusual situation where a skeleton crew in Parliament got together to very rapidly pass emergency legislation. But that legislation had problems, including some unconstitutional elements which would have allowed the government to exercise authority over taxation without having to go through Parliament first. And that's the kind of thing that we've decapitated kings over for in the past. What ended up happening was this marathon 15-hour negotiation session out of that in order to try and find a workable compromise that would allow the government to both act swiftly in the weeks ahead without necessarily circumventing Parliament to do that, which is a pretty important thing even in an unprecedented time like we're living through right now. And what I think this really demonstrated throughout was the value of having opposition in Parliament. And what was able to happen was the opposition parties were able to come together and through these negotiations come up with some compromises that would allow both the government to walk back from its attempt to claim powers that are unprecedented since the late 1600s, but also to come up with some workable solutions around oversight, which is really crucial for the role of Parliament. Parliament is all about keeping the government in check. It's all about providing oversight and accountability and doing so by controlling the public purse, which is what the government was basically trying to avoid having Parliament have that power for. So I think what we can take away from this lesson is that the value of having opposition parties in Parliament is certainly clear. It made sure that the government didn't overreach when it attempted to, and it came up with workable solutions that everyone could live with. And I think that's an important lesson to take away. The other thing is that even though those negotiations took 15 hours, the bill still passed when it was scheduled to. It was always going to go to the Senate the next day, not that same day that it was in the House of Commons. And it was always going to pass the Senate and get royal assent on that day. And that still happened. So it really showcased that this system worked. And if anything, I think what this also demonstrated is that it's important to keep Parliament going even during this pandemic crisis. They've managed to come up with a fairly workable solution in terms of having a very small number there and who can, distance themselves enough in the chamber to maintain the physical distancing that is necessary. But that way it allows oversight to continue, which is really important, and it would allow any other fiscal measures that the government may need to come up with on short order to happen even faster because they don't need to go through the 48-hour process of writing the speaker to recall the House and so on and so on. So I think that, it would be best practice for our parliamentarians to have that small group, what I call the skeleton parliament, still going throughout the duration of this so that we can both have the oversight that's necessary and pass swift measures if that becomes necessary by the government. For Looney Politics, I'm Dale Smith.